Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey friend, I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and I am thrilled to have you here with me today. This month, if you're listening in real time in July of 2021, we are celebrating 3 years of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am so honored that you've chosen to come along with us on this journey. Some of you have been here since the very beginning, and maybe some of you have joined later, but either way, the fact that we've made it 3 years is kind of phenomenal to me. And so this year, we are going to celebrate throughout the month of July our 3-year anniversary, and we're going to do something a little bit different this year. Last year, we did kind of a throwback series where we took clips from different episodes from the past and put them together, and I'll put the links to those in the show notes. But this year, we're going to do a best of series. And so what we're going to do is for 3 weeks in a row, we're going to do the best of year 1, the best of year 2, and the best of year 3. And so what I mean by best of is it's going to be based on the number of downloads that the episodes received during that year. So, for year 1, we're going to start with July 2018 and go to June 2019. And I looked at the numbers and I figured out what was the top downloaded episode for that year. And so I also just want to mention I'm taking out of the running our trailer episode and episode number 1 because those are usually at the top, but I really didn't want to replay those. But they're always there if you want to go back and listen. And so what we're going to do today is we are going to share the top episode from year 1. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer about the episode after I tell you what it is. So just stick with me here for a minute. It's episode number 17, which originally aired in October of 2018. And the episode title is How the Enneagram Can Help Nurture Healthy Relationships with Beth McCord. Now, this is where I want you to hang with me for a minute. I know that there is some controversy over the Enneagram in the Christian world. Okay, in the past few years, even since I aired this episode, I've heard more and more people that have concerns about the Enneagram and people who feel that Christians should not use the Enneagram or be associated with it at all. And I've also interacted with people that I know and love who are solid Christian believers who do use the Enneagram and do so from a faith-based perspective. And some of those people you've heard here on the podcast. And so I want to come to you knowing that there are different viewpoints on this issue. And personally, I am okay with that because this is not a core essential of the faith in my perspective, okay? I also believe and encourage you as the listener of this podcast or any other podcast that you do your own research, that you use discernment, and that you seek God to guide you in any issue that is outside of clear scriptural mandates. And so this is what I want to just ask of you and also just want to share my heart before we dive in. I never want to steer anyone who listens to this show away from truth and away from the gospel, okay? If you personally have an issue with the Enneagram or concerns about it, then you can feel free to skip this episode and or listen to the episode and not make use of that portion of the conversation. I do feel that Beth shares some really helpful insights about leadership, about marriage, and about her own journey as a business owner that you can take away take wisdom away from the conversation, even if you feel the Enneagram is not for you. But the other ask that I have for you is that if you disagree with the Enneagram being used, that you don't automatically judge any Christian who does use it. This is happening a lot, and I feel it is very unhelpful. Okay, instead of judging, I would encourage you to talk to those who personally, who are okay with using the Enneagram and hear their perspective. Take time to listen. Just like I have done over the past couple of years, I have listened to a lot of perspectives from people who feel that it's not okay. And I have taken that information and filtered it through where I'm at. Okay. And so the last thing I want to share before we jump in, and I realize this is kind of a long lead up, but I wanted to share that Beth McCord, who is the guest on this episode, recently shared a post on her website entitled, "Should Christians Use the Enneagram?" It addresses many of the concerns that have been brought up and brought to light regarding this issue, and it does so with grace. It's not a reactive piece or accusatory in any way, but I think it really helps to give some answers to some of the concerns that people have. In addition, they did a 3-part series on their podcast to address these questions. So there's one about thinking theologically about the Enneagram, a response to the history of the Enneagram, and the Christian approach to using the Enneagram. So again, if this is something that has been a question for you or a concern, and you've heard some of the arguments that say don't use the Enneagram, it shouldn't be used by Christians, then I would encourage you to consider taking a listen or reading these posts. Okay. I am not here to tell you one way or another what is the right stance. I want to encourage you to do your own research, to pray, to ask the Holy Spirit to guide you. And again, because this is not a clear-cut issue in Scripture, all right, we're not talking about a salvation issue. Therefore, I don't want to try and tell you that my perspective is the right perspective. And if you have leaders that you follow who are dictating to you how you should believe about this issue or other issues, I want to encourage you to just use caution, okay? Take a listen to episode 112, where I talk about sharing your personal convictions as a Christian leader. This is something that I would encourage anyone to listen to and to use in your own leadership. All right, I know this has been super long, but I wanted to give this disclaimer before we dive in. Now, I actually really love this conversation with Beth. I re-listened to it recently and found I got a lot of value out of it. And I would encourage you, again, just to take a listen, use discernment for yourself, and come to your own conclusions about moving forward. But without further ado, let's go ahead and take a listen to our best of episode from year 1 on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am excited today to have Beth McCord with me, and she is the founder of Your Enneagram Coach. So Beth, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to chat with you today, and we're going to be talking about healthy relationships. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. So Beth, to start us off, would you like to share just a little bit about yourself and about your leadership journey?
Yeah, let's see. I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my husband. Been married for 23 years. And I think my journey as being a Christian leader is in some ways kind of comical, and which is one reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm sure a lot of women can relate, is my leadership journey is my own inner work. What I mean by that is, as we go through the personality stuff, my personality is the one that wants to kind of fade in the background, don't want to make a big fuss, just go along to get along. I'm not, wanting to charge out there and be the front runner and make things happen.
Right.
I'm happy to support and all that kind of stuff. But God just so had it that after studying the Enneagram for 15 years, that he wanted me to be out in the front doing the work that I'm doing by leading women and men in knowing about themselves from a biblical viewpoint with the Enneagram. Yeah. So my journey really is the very work that I help others do is my work. And so part of my leadership is stepping out there, asserting myself with confidence and doing all the things that my personality inside is saying, please don't. This is very
Awesome.
uncomfortable, but I've
Yeah.
seen so much internal growth and freedom from actually doing the opposite of what the unhealthy parts of my personality think is the right way to do it. So
Wow.
that's a little bit of
That's
my journey.
that's awesome. And so how long ago did you start the Enneagram Coach, and what were you doing before then?
Before then, it's a little bit easier and also is funny. I mean, like, it's the God thing. So I got my associate's degree in sign language interpreting.
Wow.
I only did that for about a year or two because my husband and I went with the Navigators right after college. We got married when we were 20.
Mm-hmm.
So right after college, we went into the Navigators and were missionaries at Illinois State University. Then we went to seminary, had 2 kids by the time we were 25. And then he's been a pastor, associate pastor since then. So I've been a pastor's wife and a stay-at-home mom, eventually the church secretary.
They just suck you right in, don't they?
Yeah, and all those things, right? And so again, I just was the second person, like behind the pastor, like cheering everyone else on. And then the last job I had before I started doing this, I was the personal assistant to Michael Hyatt and his daughter, Megan Miller. And so that's really how the Lord got all of this going.
Yeah.
I was able to see kind of behind the scenes how so much of online courses and business work and operate from such an amazing person.
Yeah. What a great leader to be able to work with.
Both of them are actually, the whole team is fantastic, to be honest. We'll probably get into that later, like who are our biggest influencers.
Yeah.
But God just put me in such a position to see how things work and operate and how to move forward with that. So that's kind of how I got here. So if you look at my story, nothing about it makes sense to lead an organization and business. But when God calls you to something, he enables you to do it.
I love that.
Uncomfortable.
It's amazing because I feel like every single woman that I've talked to so far on the podcast has had a similar story in that some part of their journey was completely antithetical to what they would have expected growing up or in their younger years, and then God does something that just changes your journey, right? So that's awesome. Well, you mentioned mentors, so why don't I just go ahead and ask you about that right now? Can you share any mentors that you've had on your leadership journey and how that's impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the biggest one I would say is Michael Hyatt and Megan Miller, and that's his daughter, Megan Hyatt Miller. But again, I was just their personal assistants. I wasn't in the nitty gritty so much, but what's amazing about what they offer, so you can go to michaelhyatt.com or platformuniversity.com. And so as I was doing personal assistant stuff, which a lot of it's running around and doing different things, I was able to listen to pretty much like all their podcasts and all the videos on their Platform University and then all the people they recommend. So pretty much all my day, Monday through Friday was listening to these amazing people that they would recommend and absorbing all that information. Now, I honestly probably didn't think I was going to do much with it. Like, what's this going to be for? But then on top of that, so just absorbing all that information, because anyone can do that, right? You can listen to their podcast and you can go to Platform University and become a member. But being with them and kind of watching them, that was more impactful because they're the real deal. And they're such great people. They're so supportive and encouraging of their team. It showed me what a real leader looks like behind the scenes.
Wow.
And to feel that encouragement. And like, you don't have to be a boss, like bossy, in order to get people to do what you want them to do. Like, you can actually be encouraging and spurring them on and putting them in the right place and working off their strengths and instead of it being what you want to be. And so just really watching them probably was the greatest asset for me, is to go, you know what, I can do this, because my personality is like, I just want everyone to be happy. And that doesn't always work when you're a boss. And so just the balancing out of that and what the business needs, but doing it in a way that's morally and ethically and spiritually in line with my beliefs was really great to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved how you shared that about, both listening and absorbing the information, but then getting to be in real life. And so I think that there's times where we might have a mentor from a distance that we can
Yeah.
listen to and that we can read their books so we can follow them. But there's also that important aspect of being able to be in real life with people and doing life together
Yeah.
that can really impact your leadership journey. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. So then you started Your Enneagram Coach, which is your business where you teach and train people about the Enneagram. So
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about that in our conversation today. But I know that one of your biggest passions is helping people have healthy relationships. And
Right.
so I'd love to know a little bit more about that as we get started. So I guess before we go into the relationships, though, let me ask you, can you just give us kind of a high level overview of the Enneagram and why is that your tool of choice when it comes to self-awareness?
Yeah. So a high level view is the Enneagram. Well, let's just start with the Enneagram. The word means
Yes.
Ennea means 9 and gram means diagram or drawing. So if you saw the symbol, which your listeners may not have ever even seen this thing before,
Yeah.
it looks like a 9-pointed star with a circle around it.
Mm-hmm.
And the 9 points are representing 9 personality types, or basically 9 valid views of how each of us see the world. So if you've ever been frustrated with your spouse or your parents or your kids or whoever, like, why are they seeing it this way? This is like so weird. It's because they literally see it differently than you do. So
Yeah.
if you can think of it as if we all had sunglasses on that had a different colored lens, that's literally how we see it. So like if you were wearing red lenses and I'm wearing blue lenses and I'm like, why can you not see what I'm seeing? It's because we literally don't. So
Yeah.
part of my goal and role is to help people to see how the other people see the world and the circumstances that they're in. And not so much that you're going to agree with it or endorse it, but that you understand and you can have more compassion and
Right.
mercy and hopefully even forgiveness. So the Enneagram, in a nutshell, is basically your internal GPS. It's going to tell you why you think, feel, and behave in particular ways. It's not saying what you do, it's saying why you do what you do. Now, a lot of people out there will talk about what a type does, like, oh, well, they're this way. And I'm like, well, actually, all types can do pretty much all the same things, but it's why they're doing it. So since we're talking about Christian business leaders, let's say they want the offices to be spotless and clean. Well, each of the types is going to want it like that for a different reason. And so just to say, oh, well, they must be the perfectionist. Well, actually, all types can be perfectionists. But why are they being the perfectionist is the question.
Right.
And the reason why I love using the Enneagram, especially as an internal GPS system, is what God cares about is our heart, our motives, right? And the Enneagram is speaking directly to our heart's motives. Now, our personalities are wonderful. They're designed by God, but of course, on this side of the fall, they've gone askew, not completely. I mean, we obviously still glorify Him and reflect Him.
Yeah.
And so all of our personalities that are healthiest are amazing. All personalities, because some people contend otherwise, but they
Yes.
really are amazing. But when any of us are struggling and not clinging to the gospel or what is true in Christ, then we veer off and we start acting out in ways that is not helpful to others nor ourselves.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I love to use it is it clearly lets me know, how am I doing? Like, where's my heart? Is my heart grasping the cross and the gospel and surrendering and depending on Him? Or am I starting to do things in my own strength and making a mess of everything, basically?
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's in a nutshell why I use this particular tool.
Okay. And so how do you think that knowing your Enneagram type can help someone to nurture and develop healthy relationships, especially when they're a leader and they're leading other people in their lives?
Well, as the saying goes, leadership down, right? So whatever is happening up in the leadership, it's going to trickle down. So if the leadership team, and especially the boss, the leader, the CEO, whoever it is not leading with their own work, their own internal work, it's going to affect everyone. And so if the leader is willing to examine their own heart, knowing that they're already cleansed, free, loved, cherished, even though they're making mistakes, if they can cling to that truth, it's going to trickle down into their staff and into their environment. And then beyond that, it gives them the ability to have compassion on others because they're already doing their own work, right? They're like, oh, I am messed up or I am weak. And a lot of leaders are like, I can't show that vulnerability. Actually, you can. And actually, that's what your staff is needing is vulnerability. Not that you're saying you're a bad leader, that you're incompetent. It's saying I'm a human being and I need help just like everyone else. So let's do this together. That's what a team is all about. It's not the leader being perfect. It is about the leader being vulnerable and pointing everyone to the resources that everyone needs.
Yeah.
So this tool also really helps that bring the leadership to where their healthy level is, and then that will trickle down.
Right. Yeah. And we talked about this in episode 8. So if you listen to episode 8, we talked about self-awareness, and that's, something that I feel like is so key to every leader growing and developing. And just basically what you're saying is we need to be aware of our own faults and our own weaknesses, but also the strengths and the way God has wired us so that we can lead more effectively.
Absolutely.
So for those of you listening, if you don't know about the Enneagram, or if you haven't learned what type you are, etc., Beth is going to share with us a little bit about the 9 types, but this is just a really very brief overview, and she has a ton of resources to help us go deeper. So Beth, can you share with us about the 9 types, and you can explain, I know you were sharing with me before the 4 key factors, etc. You can share however much of that you want to share for each type.
Sure. Yeah. So again, the Enneagram is about why you do what you do. So when I teach and speak, I am not telling people what are some of the characteristics outwardly. You will hear that from some teachers. And yes, there are stereotypical behaviors and tendencies of the 9 types. But for example, I am a counter type 9, which goes into many layers. But what that means is, as a type 9, I don't look like your average stereotypical type 9. And so it could be hard for me to land on 9 if I'm just looking at outward behaviors.
Right.
So we are looking at the inward motivations of why we do what we do. Why are we thinking, feeling, and behaving in particular ways? So in order to find your type, you're wanting to look at 4 core elements. And we're only going to cover 2 of them here, which the 4 are your core fear. This is the thing you're always running away from. Now, in our everyday life, we're not sitting there going, what am I always running away from?
Right.
But when you start to look at this, you'll go, oh, yes, this is, something I just can't have happen. Yeah. And then we have the core desire, which is the thing we're always running towards and we're hoping to obtain. Like if we have it, life will be just perfect. This is what I long for.
Yeah.
And then we have a core weakness. And this is also called the passion in the Enneagram, or the deadly sin. And I call it the core weakness because it's like the thorn in our side, like Paul was pleading to take away. Please take this away. And God leaves it there for us to always know that we need him. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't help us to grow in it. He certainly does. But it's going to always be there to remind us that we need him. And then the core longing is what our heart longs to hear from our parents and then friends, spouses, bosses, etc. And even if they do try to give it to us, it's like a thimble of water in a well. Like it just is, that a well's dry. Like it's just not going to do it. But only Christ can fully give us that. Now, we're not going to cover the core weakness and the core longings for time's sake. But my course, Discovering You, on my website, Your Enneagram Coach, goes over all of this and how the Enneagram actually works. So think Cliff Notes version. Yeah. We will cover all of this in a short manner. That's my gift, is giving it to you in an easy, short manner. Yes. So that is going to be a great tool and resource for people to access. But for now, we'll just go over the 9 types and what they're running away from and what they desire. So the core fear and core desire. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the type 1 is the moral perfectionist. And we really go by just the numbers because the names, though they do give us insight on the type, it can bring up biases in other people's minds, whether positive or negative. And all the types, like I said, are amazingly wonderful when they're healthy and not so great when they're not. So we don't want people to go just off the names because, again, depending on your bias, it can skew that. So, but I'll let you know the names just for this sake. So type 1, the moral perfectionist, they're always running away from, which is their core fear of being wrong, bad, inappropriate, evil, corruptible, or unredeemable. And what they're desiring or moving towards is to have integrity, to be balanced, right, virtuous, and to basically be the good boy or the good girl. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah, it does, because I happen to be type 1,
Right, right.
which we talked about before. And yes, that sounds spot on for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, a lot of people might be like, well, I don't want to be wrong or bad. And that's true. Like me as a type 9, I don't want to be those things. But then when I get to my 9 and I watch myself in my everyday life, yes, I don't want to be caught being bad or wrong and all that stuff. But what will really, really make me crumble is if you have direct conflict with me,
Mm-hmm.
I will not know what to do. And like, I will just crumble inside.
Yeah.
So that's where we're trying to show people like, yeah, you're not going to, most of these things we're not like, yay, I want, these,
Right.
but what is the absolute core motivation? So that will kind of help people as they move
Right.
along on these things.
Yes.
Okay, so type 2 is a supportive advisor, and their core fear is being worthless, needy, inconsequential, dispensable, or unworthy of being loved, and definitely being rejected. That's a huge core fear for them. Now, what they desire is to be appreciated, affirmed, loved, and wanted. Yeah. So do you know any 2s yourself?
I do. I think I have a few 2s in my life. Yes.
Yeah. My daughter's a 2.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So the type 3s are the successful achievers, and their core fear is if they're failing, being incompetent, inefficient, exposed, worthless, and unable to be successful. So what they're desiring is to be valuable and admired, to have respect and high regard from others. So it's about their image. Okay.
Yeah.
The type 4 is the romantic individualist, and they fear being inadequate, emotionally cut off, plain, mundane, defective, flawed, and definitely being without some sort of important or unique significance. And they are desiring is to be unique, special, and their most authentic self. The 5s, the investigative thinker, they fear annihilation, being ignorant, invaded, incapable, not existing, and obligations placed on them or being intruded on. Yeah, so catastrophic depletion with being with too many people can be a big fear for them.
Yeah.
Now,
my sister is a 5. And so, we've talked about this quite a bit.
And so she relates.
Too many people is overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah. And they can be misunderstood. And that's where I think in my course, people can get to really know what a 5 is, especially when we get into the core weakness. So it has a lot to do with internal resources, energy, those kinds of things.
Right.
Now, what they're desiring is to be capable and competent, to have enough knowledge, to feel like they know enough to move out into the world and do. Now, the 6 is our loyal guardians. Their core fears are fear itself, being without support, guidance, security. They also fear being alone or blamed, maybe even targeted, and definitely fear being physically abandoned. So what they're desiring or they're moving towards is security, guidance, and support. And again, we'll get into more of those details when it comes to 6. And 6s and 9s have a hard time finding themselves. 6s because they have an inner committee. And I'll just go over this briefly because a lot of people have a hard time on 6. But they have an inner committee that's constantly chiming in with different scenarios, and it confuses them on, well, which one should I listen to? So they feel like they have to gain advice and support from the outside to feel okay moving forward in whatever they choose. But the inner committee does cause a lot of confusion. Plus, 6s are the types that are 2 sides to a coin. They can be extroverted and introverted. They can be brave and scared. You name it, they're one side or the other. And so when you ask them questions like, well, are you this? And they're like, well, it depends. So they're the ones who say it depends a lot. And so it makes it hard for them to land on their type because they could look at any of these numbers and say, well, it depends. And so we really are looking at, do they have their core weakness, which is anxiety, which is constantly scanning for worst case scenarios as the kind of the underlying weakness. Now we all have anxiety, but that just gives, because that's the one a lot of people struggle to land on. And I think that's a good one to point out.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So then our type 7s are the entertaining optimists, and they fear being deprived, trapped in emotional pain, limited, bored, and definitely missing out on something, especially if it's going to be fun. So now their core desire is they want to be happy, satisfied, and fully content. That's what they're longing for. And then the type 8s, the protective challengers, they fear being weak, powerless, harmed, controlled, manipulated, and definitely at the mercy of injustice. And so their core fear is that they protect themselves. And I would also even add protecting the innocent, anyone that could be harmed by over control of leaders or people in general. Now, the type 9s, the peaceful mediators, this is me. Our core fear is being in conflict, being loveless, especially conflict directed at us, any kind of tension, shut out in a discordant relationship. And definitely we fear being overlooked. Basically the feeling that our presence doesn't matter. And then our core desire, what we're striving for, is just inner stability and peace of mind, which to me, it sounds pretty simple. Like, it doesn't everyone want that? But that's how we all think. That's why the Enneagram is so remarkable, because I'm like, doesn't everyone want inner stability and peace of mind? And I remember a type 8 once who was a teacher, she was interviewing 9s, and I kept saying the word rest. Like, I don't know what it was regarding, but I kept saying the word rest. And she was like, what is it about you 9s always wanting rest? And I'm thinking, doesn't everybody want that? And of course I laughed as I'm thinking that, like, well, of course there's 9 types. They don't all want what you want, but that just goes to show you how ingrained our perspective is. And we really think everyone sees the world or wants what we want or fears what we fear. And so to understand that helps us to navigate the relationships in a totally different trajectory. It gives a lot more grace and compassion and understanding to hear them and then navigate the relationship versus being reactive. So those are your 9 types.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Beth. And this tool really has been powerful for me in my own life and in my own leadership and in my marriage. Like you were just talking about, my husband's a type 9 and I'm a type 1. And there are a lot of challenges that we had for like 12 or 13 years in our marriage that became very clear once we started to learn about the Enneagram. And it changed so much in the way we were able to relate. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about relationships and how this can help. But first, what would you recommend for someone who wants to learn their type? Like some personality tests, you can go and take a quiz, or you can do certain things to figure out your whatever, your Myers-Briggs or whatever. So with the Enneagram, what advice do you have for someone who wants to learn what their type is?
Right. I wish that there was a test that was 100% accurate, but as of right now, we just don't have that, even with the paid ones. Now, there's some paid ones that are great, but any of them are going to be about 75 to 85% accurate.
Okay.
And the reason is it's trying to understand your internal motivations. And that's pretty hard to do if you don't know what your internal motivations are. So depending on how well the person knows themselves really depends on how well the test is going to come out. Now, and I mean, there are some tests that aren't very clear. And again, they're looking at the outward behavior. So it's just, anyway. So my recommendation is you can take a free test. I have one on my website. But the second thing you can do, so when you click on take a free assessment on my homepage in the upper right-hand corner, I have 3 steps. And I really recommend doing all 3 steps. So the first one is taking the assessment. But don't just land on that like, oh, it says I'm a type 2. Oh, I must be a type 2, and then move on. You want to verify that. So on step 2 on that page that I have, when you click on that button, it is a free PDF download that you can print off. You can send to your friends, have fun with it, do party games with it. I don't know. But it's what I covered today, but with everything. So it's going to have the core weakness and the longing there too for all 9 types. And so you're going to see all of them clearly. And you can start to look at these and kind of like, okay, do I do it for this reason? Or like, let's say you get in a fight with your husband or your boss and like, well, what tripped me up? What motivated me to act that way or to do that? That free PDF will also be a really big help. And just to make sure that the assessment accurately described you. Now, the third step, when you click on the take a free assessment, the third step is my Discovering You course. And it's a 2-hour Cliff Notes version. I mean, basically, I'm probably putting 6 hours of most workshops into a 2-hour. So those are like, sweet. I don't have to like sit around reading these really complex books, because most Enneagram books are very complex. And you just get it real simple. Watch it with your friends, your spouse, your older kids. I'm going to show you exactly what the Enneagram is. There's a workbook that comes with it, and then all 9 types on why we do what we do. So you'll really clearly hear me describing in much greater detail about types. And so those steps should really help you to find your type.
Yes. Okay. I know that when I've talked to some people about the Enneagram, they'll just go, oh yeah, I took the test and I'm a 4 or I'm a 7. And I'm like, Well, that's not always. So
Yeah.
I love that you shared, like, it's not just as simple as taking a test. It's more
No.
of that inner work and really assessing your motivations
And
before you
it's,
can
and it's,
decide.
it's hard. Like my husband thought he was a type 8 for 2 years. He's a type 6. He's the counter type 6. So the one that doesn't
Mm,
look like a 6.
yeah.
It looks more like an 8. And then
Yeah.
I've had even some of the coaches I train, they're like, oh, wait, I think I'm actually this.
Yeah.
Some of the top teachers and authors did the same thing the first couple of years. You
Mhm.
think you're one type and then you do all this inner work and you're like, guess what? I think I'm. And so it's not as easy as it sounds because we do
Mhm.
use all 9 types to varying degrees. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're just using one of these and that's it. It's a
Yeah.
very complex, fluid system, which is great because that's what we are, right? We're not just
Yeah.
always one way.
Right.
And so the Enneagram is complex, but it is so rich and dynamic. In fact,
Mm.
when you find your type, you're going to be a little creeped out. It's like, who is reading my internal diary?
Yes.
I'll have people on Instagram say, I think she's like reading in my insides. And then I'll chime in like, I am,
Yes. Right.
I know, what
Mhm.
it's like for each of the types. And so
Mhm.
it's a little creepy, but then also it's really reassuring. Like, okay, though I have these struggles, there is hope. There's hope for
Yes.
change. There's hope for growth. There's
Yeah.
hope for transformation. So
Yeah.
that's the real key to all of
Mm.
this.
Can you tell us more about that? Like, where does someone want to go when they
Mhm.
want that transformation? Can you elaborate on what
Yeah,
you mean by that?
absolutely. Yeah. So going back to the illustration of it being an internal GPS. So if we're using a GPS, we have, our current location. So right now I'm in my home. And if I'm wanting to go to downtown Nashville and I'm just in the suburbs, that's my destination, right?
Mhm.
So as a type 9, that's my current location. But as a type 9, I have a destination that's best for me. There are certain aspects that a type 9 is going to look like in a healthy way. And so by understanding that, I'm like, okay, so by asserting myself, having more confidence, saying what I want, those are all healthy attributes of a 9. It
Mhm.
feels awkward and weird and horrible sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
but I know that that's part of my destination. So I want to get on that path. But just like all of us, we go throughout our days and we veer off course, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
what just happened? And so the Enneagram is also like a rumble strip on the highway. So when my personality is like, okay, no, don't say anything, don't stir the pot, don't have conflict, just go along to get along. I've set up a rumble strip in my life that when those messages come in, I have to check myself like, wait a second, because it feels so real. It feels so
Mhm.
real. But then I have to check myself like, wait, is that really what I need to be doing here? Or is this a time where I need to assert myself?
Yeah.
And those rumble strips wake us up to our normal unhealthy patterns to keep us on that best destination of where real growth and transformation happen.
Mm.
So that's how I use the Enneagram. Now, of course, coupled with the gospel is just this powerful dynamic because the Enneagram is not the transformation. It is just a
Yeah.
tool to illuminate what's happening. And like the GPS, like it's telling you, hey, you're doing great, keep going. And hey, you need to recalculate. You just went off track. And so it's only telling us those things. It's not bringing the transformation. So that's
Yeah.
where the gospel and all that stuff is going to bring us the transformation because when we realize we're already set free in him and that his righteousness is our righteousness and resting in that and believing in it and working
Yeah.
with that, that's the transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Enneagram number that you land on is not your identity.
No. Mm-mm.
It's, so your identity is in Christ if you're a believer. And I
Absolutely.
love how you use this tool in your teaching. And if you don't follow Beth on Instagram, you should go do that now because she provides just some amazing content just on Instagram alone. But you combine the tool with, like you said, the gospel to lead people to a healthier life and healthier relationships.
Yeah. And
So,
all 9 of us, all 9 types reflect God in their unique ways. And that's why it's called the body of Christ.
mhm.
We, in unity, glorify God with our diversity. And so what more beautiful way than in our businesses with our employees that we bring in people with the different personality types and strength finders and Myers-Briggs and
Mhm.
et cetera, that help bring a body together. Because if we all are hands, that's just not going to be very helpful, right? If the hand and the foot are working together and the foot's, kind of like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Just do it my way. Well, the hand's like, I don't even understand why you'd want me to do that. That doesn't make any sense. So by understanding each other's gifts and talents and how we're shaped by
Right.
God to glorify him, it allows us to spur each other on into being the person that God created us to be. But here's the thing. The reason why I do what I do is each of our personalities have core lies and things that we believe. They trip us up all the time, and we think we're not loved unless we do it this way or if we do it that way. And that's where the gospel frees us. So if we can understand what is tripping us up, what's keeping us from understanding the real essence and the capacity that the gospel has to transform us, because we don't understand that, we get stuck. The more we understand how it has freed us personally in our personality type, we will soar. Now, it doesn't mean we'll soar like, oh, it's super easy. Like, this is the hardest work I've ever done. And as I do my business as a type 9, people always laugh like, yeah, that would be really hard being a type 9 who doesn't like conflict and not asserting themselves. I mean, like, that is leadership, Beth. And so I've had to navigate that in my own way, trusting that the Lord has put me here for a reason. Now, that doesn't mean I have to do everything. I mean, think about Moses being a stutterer. And he's like, really? You want me to lead? Like, I can't hardly even talk. But God brought him, Aaron, who speaking for us. So all of us are going to have our weaknesses, but then God brings other resources and people to help us in those weaknesses. And it shows us that we are dependent on him and his plan. So being weak in itself, or having a weakness and a vulnerability, is actually a good thing if we cling to the cross and to what God has.
Yes. As you were talking about the body of Christ and the different parts, leadership can't exist without more than one person,
Right.
Someone can stand in a room all by themselves and say, I'm a leader, but if there's no one else around, they're not actually leading. So let's talk a little bit about the different important relationships that a leader might have in their life and how they can nurture these relationships in a healthy way. Using the Enneagram and any other tips you might have. So I want to start with marriage, because I think if you're married, if you're listening and you're married, that's really probably your most important relationship in your life. And if you're not married, that's okay. I think you'll still get something out of these next parts of this conversation. So how can someone who is a leader nurture their marriage, and how will that impact their leadership?
Yeah, it's so good. So the biggest thing, like for my husband and I in doing this work, we got married when we were 20, and nobody knows themselves, let alone anyone else at that age. Then we added 2 munchkins by the age of 25. I mean, like, so 4 people living together that don't even know themselves, let alone each other. And it's just, it doesn't go well, right? So by understanding ourselves, doing our own work, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is triggering me, setting me off, upsetting me, frustrating me, whatever word you want to use? Why is that happening? What is the core fear I'm running away from? What is the core desire that I'm not getting, or this person is keeping from me? And then, like, what is that core weakness that's constantly tripping me up? But then the core longing, what message I long for, what am I basically forcing others to do for me so that I feel okay? So for me, as a type 9, my core longing is your presence matters. So I've always been striving, to do anything and everything for that to be everyone's message to me. Whether it's my parents, people pleasing, accommodating, making everyone happy, going along to get along, all the things that a 9 does. I do that because I wonder, does my presence matter? Is it important? Now, here's the thing. When your listeners find what their core longing is, they're going to find that your spouses, your employees, I don't care who it is, your parents, your kids, we all have cisterns that we dig. So Jeremiah 2:13 talks about that we've dug cisterns, which are like wells. But the thing is, so we've done all this work. We've dug a well, we've put bricks around it so it will hold water. But what God says is we've forsaken him, the spring of living water, and dug these cisterns that are broken. So just think of even a clay pot, if you will, and that it's cracked. And you start putting in water in it, like, it's not going to hold. Like, so we have all these things that we're trying to fill our lives up with. It could be our business. It could be our spouse, our kids, you name it. Not that these things are bad and wrong. What's not good is that we rely on them or these things to fill us up. And they're each like little thimbles, and they have a little bit of water in it. And then they add to your cistern, and you're like, really? Like, that's all you're going to give me?
Mm-hmm.
And we get upset because they didn't satiate or satisfy what we need. And then not only do they put a little bit in, it doesn't hold water. So then it's gone. But right next to us is the spring of living water. So we can get all we need and then some from him. And he fulfills the longing that we have. When we know that our longings and our desires and everything's been taken care of by him, and we actually rest in that, we will then move forward as leaders in such a different trajectory, whether it's in our family life. Because now with my husband, I still long for him to think my presence matters. And I get tripped up from time to time when we're in arguments, and that message always pops up in my head. See, you don't matter. You're present. And like, no, that's not true. He's my best friend. I do matter to him. So we have these core lies that are swimming around in our head. We have to capture them and give them back to the Lord and believe what's true. And so having all of those kind of internal conversations with ourselves, not berating ourselves or beating ourselves up, that only makes things worse. But by saying, no, what's true is I'm unconditionally loved, forgiven, and free in Christ. And here are the things that he has done for me and on my behalf. That frees me to live in this fullness, even if our spouses don't come through for us, even if our kids don't come through for us, even if our employees don't come through for us, because they're not, but he already has. And so if I can put all my stock in that and build off of that, then if I'm filled up, if my whole being is filled up with all that spring of living water and continually there, then when people throw in a little thimble of water, it's kind of like, oh, that's cool, because it's like we're already filled up. And so it's just this like sweet, oh, I know that you really meant that to nourish me and love me, but I'm not so desperate that I want to pull them down or hurt them in the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that really the foundation for healthy relationships is being filled up by our relationship with Christ.
Yes.
First and foremost, and not relying on our marriage or our team or our coworkers or anyone else to provide what we need.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Think about a drowning person, out in the lake. Let's say their coworkers, their husband, their kids come out to try to rescue them. Even though the person loves them, they're going to pull them down and most likely drown them with themselves. They can't fulfill what Christ can only do. And Christ is the only one that can lift us up. And so we need to be very careful in, am I asking for my spouse, my kids, my coworkers, whatever the people are, am I asking them to do what only Christ can do? Most of the answers are going to be yes, because I can say yes myself. But by realizing that, it helps us to let that go, and not that we're letting go our core longing, the core longing God gave us, but we shift the longing to be met by Christ. And when he meets it, we're no longer drowning, we're fulfilled, we're free, we're, living out exactly how God created us to be. But none of this is hard. And in fact, I was listening to a sermon the other week about how going through the narrow gate and wide is the path to destruction. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I experienced, because what he's talking about, the straight and narrow, the word straight is being pressed in, like a narrow gate being very pressed. And so think about, he was talking about Narnia in the wardrobe. You go into this very small, like door, this wardrobe that is like, there's all these coats and claustrophobic, but then all of a sudden there's this immense new world that opens up. So as we're growing in our personalities, we're going to be hard pressed internally. It feels the opposite of everything. Our personality will start throwing temper tantrums and all the things. And so that's where we have to be the adults internally to our personality and say, I know you desire this, but over here is actually the right path. And that will then open up a whole new world. But the path to growth is super hard. You feel very constrained and pushed in and hemmed in. But when we get there and experience it, it is truly beautiful.
I love that. Okay. So let's just briefly hit on parenting and how the Enneagram can help someone in their parenting. I watched a video that you have on YouTube about this, and I loved your insight from your family. So can you just share, like, for someone who maybe wants to have a healthier relationship with their kids, how they can use the Enneagram to help with that? And at what age is an appropriate age to start thinking about this?
Yeah, I started using the Enneagram pretty intensely when my kids were 3 and 5. when I say that, I wasn't using it necessarily with them specifically,
Right.
but for my own personal growth.
Yeah.
But of course, I was curious, like every parent would be, like, what are my kids? How can I help them? But in my own journey and my own study, what I realized is it really is hard to do. And the reason why I say that is what I would say, actually, to begin with, is you can eliminate a couple of personalities. You can kind of like, I'm pretty sure they're not this. I'm pretty sure they're not that. But then you want to hold 2, 3, maybe 4 numbers loosely. So with my kids, I thought my son was maybe a 1 or 2, 1 or 2, 1 or 2 for a long time. And then I threw 6 in there. I was like, maybe 6. Well, when he was 14, he took one of the tests and we talked through it and he landed on 6. So he had to name his core motivations.
Okay.
And I wasn't surprised by that stage. By that stage, he in 6s have a lot of 1-ish and 2-ish qualities in them. So it made sense. Now, my daughter was much more surprising to me. She looked a lot like me in all the things that she did. And I thought, well, maybe a 2, maybe 9, but I think more 9. Well, it wasn't until she was, I think, 14 or 15 that she was more emotionally aware. She took the test and she got a 2. And I was like, oh, well, what do you think? And she's like, oh, definitely. And she's reading all the things. I'm like, really?
Oh, wow.
Well, here's the thing what I noticed personally. Just like all of us parents that have kids and then they become teenagers and they start acting differently than what they had in years past. And it's like, why are you acting like this? This isn't who you are. Well, actually, it might be who they really are. The thing is that my daughter was really taking on a lot of me, when she was younger, doing a lot of my stuff. And then once they become teenagers, the personality wants to really burst out and do their own thing,
Right.
Which is wonderful, but it also can be very confusing for the parent. And so here you kind of may have hemmed them in to being a certain type, and then all of a sudden they're doing different stuff. And that can be confusing, or you want to label it as bad or wrong, or no, that's not you. And so we have to give them that freedom and grace. So I would say middle to late teenage years is a good place for them to start, especially if you've done a lot of talking about the inner world when they're younger.
Okay.
And so that's what we did with our kids.
Yeah.
Even when we didn't know who they were, we just talked about our inner world. Like, so what's going on? Why did you do that? Is there something going on that we should know? How can we help? How can we support? And just inviting them to a safe place to share instead of jumping on them and getting all upset with them, and just being parents that can listen and steer them. And obviously we had to discipline them, but trying to give them a lot of space to be them, but being their guide was the biggest thing for us. So that's kind of when I would say that you could have. And so I would say any kid probably from the ages of probably 12-ish on could watch my Discovering You course. They may not know their type, because even some adults can't find their types right away. But at least it will give them the common language in the family to be able to start talking about these things.
Okay, cool. And really, ultimately, it needs to be the child or the teenager who identifies their number, not the parent.
Right. Or anyone for that matter. So as a boss, you can't type your employees. Because like I said, I don't look like a type 9 on the outward. I'm much more assertive. There's a lot of reasons to that, which we can't get into today.
Yeah.
I'm a 9 with an 8 wing, and I'm the social 9, which is the counter 9. There's all these layers.
Yeah.
But I don't look like your typical 9.
Okay.
But to the core, my core fears and desires and everything is 9.
Okay.
And so that's why we have to give other people the space to name themselves.
Yes. Right. So important. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk for a minute about using this tool within our teams. If some of our listeners might be leading teams at their church, whether they're in ministry or they might have their own business or they might be working in a corporate space. So how can we use this within teams to be more effective as a leader?
Yeah, that's really great. I think the biggest thing, first and foremost, is to cultivate an environment of understanding and compassion and empathy, grace, mercy, and definitely forgiveness. Yeah. Because if God designed us all different and unique, even in our strengths and our weaknesses, then to be like Christ would mean to understand one another and to support one another in their amazing attributes, like the high qualities, and cheering them on, but also supporting them where they're weak and not coming at them with criticisms or judgments. How can you support them? Or let's say that they've been in a role that's just not their gifting. How can we shift and make them in a role that's good? Or maybe they have to be in that role. Okay, so what can we do to make this better? How can we support you? And so the biggest thing is asking people what's going on in their heart, not shaming them, not belittling them, not condemning them, but coming alongside them and supporting them the best that we can, and recognizing, you know what? For me as a type 9, I have 2 type 3s on my team that are amazingly efficient and fast. My brain does not work like that. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
And now that doesn't mean I don't get a lot of stuff done. I do. I work long hours because I love what I do. But if they were to be like, oh, why isn't she faster? Or why isn't she more confident or assertive? That's not going to help me because I'm just a different person. At the same time, I can get really frustrated with other people because other people, 9s, can understand all 9 types and why they do what they do, and we can feel for them. I can get really upset when people are short and curt or not tactful and mean. How do you not know how to talk to people? So all types can get upset with others, but instead, how can we have compassion, understanding for the weaknesses that others have naturally? How can we support them? But then how can we also encourage where we know that they're already really great at, just naturally?
Yeah. I know for me, it's been powerful just in being able to know why I'm feeling certain ways when I'm dealing with team situations. And for me as a 1, I tend to have pretty high standards for work and quality and excellence and all of that. And so I have to be careful when I'm working with someone who isn't quite as detail oriented that I'm not reacting strongly to that and that I'm having grace and that I know. And even for myself, when I make a mistake, that it can be very internally difficult for me when I make a mistake. So being aware of it, it's so helpful when you're leading a team to know yourself, first of all, and then to know your team members if possible.
Yeah. And we've used it in our teams, especially when I was the administrative assistant at church. My husband is a type 6. For those that know the Enneagram, he's a counterphobic 6, so he looks more 8-ish. And our senior pastor is a type 4, and our youth pastor was a 9, and I'm a 9. And we would just be very vulnerable with where we were at because we knew we could trust each other to lift us up. So if, let's say the youth pastor who's a type 9 was feeling vulnerable and having a hard time asserting himself because of certain parents, he could share that, and then we could know how to better support him. Right. And that's the thing we have to understand about the Enneagram. It is the most exposing you'll ever be. So if you don't use it correctly, you will damage your relationships tenfold. And so we don't want to use it as a sword, oh, you're being such a whatever number. Or you don't want to say, well, I am a 9, so that's just what we do.
Yeah. It's not a crutch to lean on.
It's not. Right. It is a tool to be used, very specifically in growth and to edify one another and to support one another. Yeah. But so having those conversations is really important. Hey, today I'm feeling like my presence doesn't matter. I know that's not true, but man, it really feels true. And this is why I'm not doing what maybe I should be doing, and asking for help and support, or let's say if I, for instance, my daughter and my husband, a type 9 and type 6, they can have little spats, I guess, little conflicts that aren't really conflicts, but in my world, they are huge conflicts and tension. I'm like, can we please stop? And they're like, what? We're just talking. I'm like, this is not fun, but then I can step back and go, wait, this is okay. They're not fighting. They're just discussing something,
Yes.
And so I have to know where my personality chimes in and wants to force everyone to do it my way. And maybe it's that I remove myself, or I just sit there and go, this isn't that bad. It is okay. But we have to check ourselves instead of forcing people to come through for us the way we think they should come through, which can be very challenging, especially as a leader of a company. I know that I do want what I want. As a 9, I don't honestly know what I want a lot of times, but when I do, I want it to happen. And I'm sure for other types that are stronger in their visions, that can be really hard if other people bring up, well, what about this? Or what about that? Or what this could be? That could really be tension, but at the same time, maybe that's what God's using to make sure everything goes well. So having good conversations, talking about our inner world in a non-threatening, non-accusatory way, listening well, and affirming one another is really going to be key.
Yeah. Would you have any tips for someone who maybe they're leading a team or maybe they're just part of a team where there's one particular person that they really are struggling with, and they're struggling with the personality, or maybe that person is in a really unhealthy place.
Yeah.
Any tips for dealing with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is if you can know their types, that would be super helpful. I think finding a good Enneagram coach for those that are having a hard time landing on their type to make sure is great. I have lots of people that have trained under me. But then I think once you find their type, really trying to understand what's it like for that person to be so activated. What are they longing for? Is there anything I can do to mitigate or help that situation? But ultimately knowing it's not up to us to fix them, but are there things that I might be doing that's frustrating or causing this to continue or to make it worse? And then ultimately I would say get either a good Enneagram coach or business coach or whatever tools and resources that can help that person is going to be really helpful in showing them like you do matter to the team and we want to make sure that you are at the best place. And that might involve a conversation or a team meeting with everyone because maybe it's something that the team is doing as a whole that's really hard for that person. So there's a lot of different things that are going on, but I would say first start with the person knowing themselves the best you can and you knowing what their type is and how what are they needing to feel like people are coming alongside them and supporting them and caring for them.
Yeah.
Each type, it's different. So it's not like, oh, well, just be there for the person. Well, what does that mean? Like each type, it's very different. And so that's where having a good Enneagram coach coming in and doing some business coaching is really, could be very insightful for everyone.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And seeking to understand, I think, is the key there that you just shared. Like not going in with, I have all the answers and I know what needs to happen.
Yeah. Because remember, you're seeing through your red lens.
Right.
I'm seeing through blue and Sue's seeing through yellow and Bob is seeing, in pink.
Yeah.
And so we're all seeing life in totally different viewpoints. And it doesn't mean we can't come to an understanding.
Right.
But we are fundamentally just seeing the world differently. And so how can we best come together, hear each other's hearts, love one another in a way that is honoring to them? That doesn't mean acquiescing to everything that they need, but honoring them and how God designed them, but also moving the company forward in the way that it needs to go as well.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah. So Beth, you are a mom, you're a business owner, your husband is a pastor, you guys have a lot going on. And like you already shared, nines sometimes tend to be more,
let's chill out. Let's hang
they
out.
like to chill. My husband's a 9 and he is so good at just like calming me down and helping me to chill out.
Right.
Because I like to just keep going all the time. So I love to hear if there's any habits or routines that help you to just maintain a healthy life and self-care, whatever that might be for you, so that you can stay healthy and continue doing all those different roles effectively.
Yeah. Like anyone, I too can get imbalanced. I do love what I do. So I do work pretty long hours. Now my kids are both in college, so it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
It was nothing like this when they were at home. I wasn't doing this work. But I would say self-care for me, obviously, getting in the Word, soaking up the gospel, reminding myself of what's true, not just on a daily basis, but hourly, literally. I have some music that the lyrics, they're old hymns that have been redone by Indelible Grace that I listen to. It's been for the last basically 18 years. I've listened to their works and just allowed the words to really soak in. And so then there's certain books that have been really impactful to me, From Fear to Freedom by Rosemary Miller.
Okay.
And then A Shepherd's Look at Psalms 23 by Philip Keller. Those two, they're short books. I grew up with a reading disability, which is another kind of fun, like insight. So all the stuff that I do, it's like, that's probably why I'm passionate about bringing it in the Cliff Notes version is like, please don't make me read this really long. I'm a very slow reader, but when I read, I absorb it. So that is the good thing. But those two books are short, but super impactful and have meant a lot to me and reminding me of really who I am, not just what my feelings are, what my personality is training in, but getting me grounded. And then of course, as a 9, I love like getting out with bonfires or in a hammock or something. But it's interesting because as a 9, we don't always know what we need or what we want. And so finding those things that are really rejuvenating to me has been really vital. Instead of just doing what my husband likes to do or my kids like to do, what do I need is an important thing.
Okay. That's awesome. So you already mentioned a couple books, but I always like to end with talking about the fact that I believe leaders are learners and we should always be continually growing and learning as leaders. So what is your favorite method of learning new things?
Yes, my favorite method would either be audiobooks or video, like YouTube videos or something like that. And it is because of my reading disability. I read fine. I don't have dyslexia or anything like that, but I am a very slow reader. Now, the good thing is when I do actually sit down and read and I highlight, and I have to like highlight everything and underline everything. My husband's like, and the point is like, like highlighted everything, you know.
This is all a key point.
Right. But when I do that, no, I don't do everything, but when I do that, it soaks in and it kind of sticks, but it takes a lot of time. So if I'm wanting just to learn fast and get things kind of soaking in, audiobooks and videos are super helpful for me. So that's probably where I would land.
And what's something that you've been learning or listening to or reading lately that you think that our listeners might want to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, just kind of coming from my background, anything that Michael Hyatt puts out is great. He is a exemplary type 3, as in like doing his own inner work. So he has books like Platform, Living Forward, he has lots of stuff.
Yeah, he does.
Platformuniversity.com is their membership site, and they have just literally everything under the sun in there. It's just fabulous. So
that's a great resource for someone that wants to start a business.
Absolutely.
Or
I think inexpensive for what you get. And also inside it, the reason why I also point people to that is inside it, he has all these interviews with all of these great leaders. So it's not just that you're listening from Michael, you're listening to all these people. So then you start to go, oh, Jeff Walker's great, and Jeff Goins is great, and you know all these other people that he has interviewed. You can then start branching out and reading their materials or learning from them. So for me, I feel like Michael Hyatt is kind of like that hub of business know-how, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and again, he's coming from a faith perspective too, which is helpful
very much
if you want to learn from someone who has that perspective,
right?
Awesome.
And who does his work.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, Beth, I appreciate your time so much today, just sharing so many valuable insights on relationships and on the Enneagram. So can you share with everybody how they can connect with you? And if there's anything that you have on your website that you would direct them to? I think you already mentioned that one of them, but if there's anything else you want to share.
No, I'd love to. Yeah. So obviously on Instagram, we love for people to join. It's such a sweet community. We've got, right now we have over 36,000. And people are tagging their friends and saying encouraging comments and chiming in. It's a real sweet environment, which I love. Some Enneagram, or just like anything, you know, not everyone's, but at least they are in mine. They're really kind. That's a genuine thing to say too. But yeah, so Instagram is great. But yeah, so on my website, yourenneagramcoach.com, there is a section at the top that says online courses. And the Discovering You is what we talked about, the overview. But then the next one is called Exploring You. And if you want to know how to grow in your type from a faith-based perspective, then Exploring You is 5 coaching sessions that I do in person with people. But this is at a much cheaper price, and it's a go at your own pace, but it's so good. I have 5 guide sheets that I take you through in 5 lessons, and I just walk you through them. And you learn about your personality in bite-sized lessons so you don't get overwhelmed. But it is transformative. I love what I do because I get to take people through these 5 sessions and literally see a person transform right before my eyes. And it is just so powerful. So that is my heartbeat, is the Exploring You course. Now, here's the good news. If you're interested in both, you would just buy Exploring You because the Discovering You is inside it.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you happen to pick the wrong type, you can just let us know and we'll exchange it within the first 30 days that you purchased it. So if you're like, I want to get the Exploring You, but I don't know what type I am yet, we got you covered. So get one of them, and then one that you think you are. And then if you need to switch, we will.
Okay. Awesome. That sounds like an amazing resource for anyone who wants to just continue learning and growing as a leader. So
it is really great. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Thanks so much for being part of our podcast.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Hi, friend. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you took the time out of your day to listen, and I truly hope that it made an impact on your ability to lead well. If it did, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? You could take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social media, maybe an Instagram story or on Facebook, or you could just text the link to a friend. We would truly appreciate that, as when you share with a friend, it helps spread the word about the podcast, and it helps more women to be able to be impacted so that they can lead and love others well. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.